On tonight's No Disco, we pay very special homage to one of the great groundbreaking and rule-breaking bands of Irish musical history, Planxty. The great Irish trad and classical arranger and composer Sean O'Riordan changed the face of Irish music in the late 50s by developing a new group dynamic with his ensemble of virtuoso traditional musicians, Ceoltóirí Cúlan. Their work would go on to inspire future generations of such bands. One of those bands was Planxty. Starting with the four original members of Andy Irvine, Liam O'Flynn, Dónal Lunny and Christy Moore, Planxty began a musical journey in the early 70s, creating a unity of ballad singing, folk guitar styles, Eastern European music and American roots with traditional Irish music. It was here in Dowling's pub in Prosperous where a young Christy Moore and a young Dónal Lunny attended their first trad sessions. In fact, it was in this very room where they saw Liam O'Flynn play pipes for the first time. Pat Dowling, the landlord, was a hugely respected man. He kept all the instruments on standby: bodhrán, flute, banjo, fiddle, accordion, in case a musician popped in and felt like joining in on the session.
Well, I suppose with Liam, I was very fortunate, and the first piper I ever heard was Liam O'Flynn. He was from about 8 miles away, and I used to hear him playing in Prosperous. And I was just blown away by what I heard, by the sound of the instrument, when I didn't realise when I heard him that he was such a wonderful player. It was only as time went on I came to realise that he was a maestro, you know. With Dónal, we just more or less grew up together. We grew into music together. With Andy Irvine, I'd known his work before, during and after Sweeney's Men, and that coupled with the magic of Sweeney's Men, I loved what they did. Sweeney's Men awakened something in me. I heard it over in England and I was just blown away by the sound.
Oh, he was big. He was huge on the English folk scene at that time, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think just after that, he'd said, would you do a gig for me in somewhere in the southwest of England, because I'm double booked. And he said, it's £15. I thought, oh, that was a few pounds more than I was getting. And I got there and the guy said, ladies and gentlemen, he said, I'm terribly sorry, Christy Moore can't appear tonight, but he sent along, I can't remember his name, but here he is.
In the early 60s, O'Donoghue's pub here on Bagot Street was a focal point of the emerging folk scene. It was here that Paddy and Maureen O'Donoghue offered bowls of soup and pints to struggling young troubadours. Characters such as Luke Kelly, Ronnie Drew and Johnny Moynihan swapped songs and ideas long before they were considered legends. Another one of these young beatniks was Andy Irvine, a London-born musician of Irish and Scottish parentage.
Parents of fame and renown, oh, had I been obedient and kept the command, I never would have broken the laws of the land.
Long before Sweeney's Men or Planxty, this was the place where Andy sang English folk songs over a drone emanating from a broken cistern in the men's toilets. As it turned out, Andy would spend much of his musical career singing along to drones.
You know, my mother was a musical comedy actress, and I had all these old 78s, cracked and whatever, and I used to play them. And I didn't like the music, but I liked something about it, you know. And so I guess I always knew that I was interested in music, but it took the first 15 years to discover what it was. And Woody was as soon as I heard Woody, I remember the moment really well. I bought this record. I had no idea who he was, whether he was famous or whatever. I put this record on, and the turntable was one of those automatic ones, you know, so I clicked, and I sat down, and I waited, and the very first, beat, I thought, yes, this is it, discovered it at last.
The first incarnation of Sweeney's Men was formed around 1966 with Andy Irvine and his folk buddies Johnny Moynihan and Joe Dolan. Moynihan had introduced them to the Greek bouzouki, and together with Andy they initiated the famous mandolin bouzouki interplay that would later become a strong feature of Planxty's music.
That was kind of invented by Johnny and me one night in his parents' kitchen, which I remember well. He was playing Rattling Roaring Willie, and he was trying to get the phrasing of the tune, and we suddenly decided to put a harmony to it, you know, and I think that was perhaps the beginning of the bouzouki mandolin interplay. I think the thing about Johnny is that he's never changed. You know, we've all evolved, but Johnny decided on his principles a long, long time ago, and he's never wavered from them since then.
That was part. It was also the accents they sang in, and there was something very real for me about it. They weren't kind of chronicling the music. They were living it, and they had the lifestyle of it, and they were innovative. Johnny Moynihan, very innovative man, you know. They were very exciting.
Trapped in the middle of Ireland's showband era, Sweeney's Men stuck out like a sore thumb with their scruffy demeanour and innovative interpretations of Irish, Scottish and American folk songs.
I was in Sweeney's Men for a year, 2 years, nearly. And by that time I kind of had enough, because we used to play, we used to play in dance halls. We'd only play for 20 minutes or something in a dance hall, but it was absolute hell, because the show band would never, they'd never change the settings on their amplifier for you. So you had the vocalist's mic, which was kind of volume 11, like, you know, and you had the brass player's mic, which was volume 1. And the other two guys, if I was singing a song, the other two guys would be as close as they could to this big, sure bulkhead mic, you know, going kind of hitting it as hard as they could, and maybe singing harmonies like that. And I'd be holding my instrument up to the hot mic and trying to sing into it. And there were no monitors, so it was echoing around this big concrete space with 1,500 people who weren't listening anyway, you know. I had some dreadful moments. I sang The Old Maid in the Garret, which was our big hit number. I sang it in all 12 keys one night down in County Wexford, you know. And then the terrible thing was there was no back exit from dance halls. You went into the dressing room and you put your things away, and then you took a deep breath and you walked out through the public, you know, hoping they wouldn't see you with a coat on, like, you know.
Joe Dolan left for Israel in 1967 to be replaced by Terry Woods. Andy himself left after one album to wander Eastern Europe in 1968. Andy's trip to the Balkans proved very educational.
Well, the first time I heard Bulgarian music, which was played on the radio a lot in those days, you know, because I mean culture, like the overthrow of Stalinism was a necessity, historical necessity, but it was a shame that all the bath water was thrown out as well, you know, because culture was much respected in those days. And I heard it on the radio. I was hitchhiking with a woman who became my wife quite briefly, and the driver was trying to talk to us, and we didn't have enough Bulgarian, and the engine was very loud anyway, so he turned on the radio, and this music came out, and I went kind of, oh, that must be Bulgarian folk music, and I was hooked on it. It was like the Woody Guthrie thing earlier on, from the first bar. I was kind of, yes!
It was in the basement of this very house in prosperous County Kildare that all four original members of Planxty recorded together for the first time. Christy Moore had returned from England with a plan to assemble the country's finest musicians to record his second solo album, which he subsequently titled Prosperous. Joining Christy was Andy Irvine of Sweeney's Men, renowned Kildare piper Lee Mogo Flynn, and Christy's old school pal Dónal Lunny. The chemistry was so good that all four members reconvened in Dublin in January 1972 to form a band called Planxty.
Basically, we were having such a good time that it just dawned on us one day, should we try and put this together on a more permanent basis? And everybody was up for it. But we had to go on and finish what it was we were doing. So we went away for about 6 months and then reconvened. Liam ceased being a teacher. Dónal ceased being a member of We Four. Andy came back from Bulgaria. I came back from Yorkshire. And we started rehearsing.
Probably the most important thing in my entire life was Donovan was touring with an Irish band in Easter 1972. And we knew the people who were promoting it, or Dónal did. Dónal knew everybody anyway. And we were asked if we'd play support. And the first gig was in the Hangar in Galway, which was a dance hall. And we went on first, and the sound man was Donovan's brother-in-law, and he wasn't very interested in us, and he wasn't even there when we got up to play, you know. But the audience went berserk, and I thought, there's a fight. It's a dance hall fight has started up here, you know. And I turned to the lads, alarmed, and then they were going kind of, and Donald's smile was kind of like this, you know. And I thought, well, it obviously isn't a fight. And it took me a while to realise that we were going down like you wouldn't believe. It was like the audience discovered that night something which they'd been looking for. Des had to go and ask Donovan it was okay to play an encore. And my recollection of that tour, which was about 6 gigs, was that apart from the Dublin one, we blew him off the stage every night.
What's widely known as the first period of Planxty, between 1972 and 1975, they recorded 3 vibrant albums, titled Planxty, Well Below the Valley, and Cold Blow and the Rainy Night.
You know, the energy that comes from that sort of chemistry, it's all there in the music, and that sort of, you know, excitement. And people who heard, you know, Planxty for the first time, I think that, you know, you instinctively become aware of that. Like the musicians, it's happening for the musicians. An audience really you know, is turned on by that. And people were turned on by it. I mean, when we started Planxty, we decided, you know, we'd give it like 3 months, and if nothing was happening, then fair enough. In 3 months, the thing had really taken off, and it was, you know, it was like a runaway train. Like you couldn't get off.
The influence of Planxty is as relevant today as it ever was. From Irish acts such as David Kitt and the Frames, to Manchester's Doves, to Kentucky's Will Oldham, and far beyond, their sense of adventure resonates from generation to generation. By the end of their first period, Planxty had already left behind a legacy of music that had taken traditional Irish music to new and exotic places, without ever disgracing the tradition itself. There were, of course, a few detractors who disapproved of musicians such as Liam O'Flynn, joining a band of guitars, bouzouki's and mandolins.
When she got up and I lay down, saying, "Lassie, are we able?" But me told her, "Yeah, fall the doodle da, diary fall the doodle dairy oh."
I think the only one who might have suffered that a little bit might have been Liam in the early days. And some of the more conservative elements of, say, the piping world and of the traditional music world might have thought it was a bad move for Liam to be playing with guitars and mandolins. But then, once the band recorded and once the band started playing, I mean, people like Seamus Ennis gave the band his blessing. And generally, the few critics, most of them came around. There still will be a few of them there, you know, but so what? I mean, we weren't making music for anybody except ourselves. Yeah. And we were happy with it.
This was a sort of a new direction. You know, traditional musicians were unused to that sort of approach and so on. As indeed I was myself, but I've always had a terrific musical curiosity, I suppose. But I also knew that the people involved very well and respected their music. And I remember we had actually one rule in the band, that if there was any one individual within the band who who really didn't want to do this, that, or the other, or whatever, that was respected, and there was no further argument about it. And that was to me, that was a terrifically important thing, you know.
Yeah. In late 1978, all 4 original members of Planxty reformed the group. Dónal Lunny left the Bocky band and brought with him the great flute player Matt Molloy, who later went on to play with the Chieftains. The second period of Planxty began with the album After the Break, recorded here at the famous Windmill Lane Studios in Dublin.
Here's the health to the reams of married life, the soap, the suds and blue. Hearts through love and pate and starched in the washing soda too.
The first 3 albums have a lot of youthful energy about them, the novelty, etc. But for me, and I know I'm in a minority here, I prefer the second 3 albums because I think musically they're more intricate. We had evolved musically quite a long way by that time, and I just prefer the music. I think it's more interesting to listen to. But when I think of the times we had, I think 1972 1972 to through to the end of 74 was magic. 74 till Brady joined the band was kind of a struggle, and then it was great for a while with Brady until we were just too tired to continue. Yeah. And 79 onwards, it was okay. I don't remember it as being I could be wrong, but I don't remember it as being it was certainly not 1972. Yeah. The music was better, but more was expected of us at that point. You know? I think it was more responsibility to do well, and when we didn't get the reaction we wanted, there was a kind of slight feeling of, with me anyway, of paranoia. You know?
The second period of Planxty stretched from the Reformation in late 1978 to their final demise in 1983. Over this period, a further 3 albums were made. After the Break, The Woman I Love So Well, and Words and Music. Although the music was dazzling, the spirit of being in the band wasn't quite there. It was always going to be impossible for Planxty to recreate the past. Records and live appearances became more sporadic. The Woman I Love So Well came out in 1980 and featured the additions of Noel Hill on concertina, Tony Linnane on fiddle, and Bill Whelan on Fender Rhodes. Their final release was Words and Music in 1983. Christy and Dónal moved on to Moving Hearts, and Liam and Andy kept the Planxty name with a variety of lineups, performing live but never recording again.
Lie still, me little Musgrave, and hug me from the cold.
When I think of Planxty, or when you mention Planxty to me, it would be the early time that would always spring to mind. It was different. You know, I suppose we were a bit more road weary at this stage. Yeah. We'd been around the block a few times. Yeah. And I mean, I know it's 20 years ago, but we'd still been around the block a few times even then. So it didn't have the freshness or the vitality, and the tours were very, very arduous. Yeah. I remember that particular 1978-79 time, we did some crazy touring. Yeah. but the 2 hours every night was always pretty good, but the other 22 could have been difficult enough.
The original members of Planxty did squeeze in one more memorable performance at the 1981 Eurovision Song Contest. While Europe was celebrating the genius of Buck's Fizz, Planxty were quietly, elegantly supplying the interval performance with a unique piece of music by Bill Whelan called Time Dance. 14 years later, Whelan was back at the Eurovision with another piece of music spawned from Time Dance and called River Dance.
The first 2 years of Planxty was maybe some of the most exciting times, particularly when the band was taking off, because it was like there was a generation of people being turned on to this music that we were playing, and were discovering their roots and their heritage and their Irishness the same way as I did with the Clancy brothers. It was just a huge turn on, you know, and to be part of that and to be up on stage providing that was a tremendous buzz.